I think at the beginning of Sir Oliver Robbins's evidence,
Kepala Kantor Kabinet Inggris, Cat mengungkap fakta mengejutkan. Tidak ada catatan resmi terkait keputusan Perdana Menteri Keir Starmer dalam menunjuk Peter Mandelson sebagai duta besar. Pernyataan ini disampaikan saat sidang parlemen, ketika Cat mengakui bahwa seharusnya keputusan penting seperti itu memiliki dokumentasi resmi. Namun dalam kasus ini, catatan tersebut tidak ditemukan. Kontroversi semakin memanas setelah Mandelson dikaitkan dengan mendiang Jeffrey Epstein, meskipun ia membantah melakukan kesalahan. Tekanan terhadap Starmer meningkat, terutama terkait proses pemberian izin keamanan yang dianggap tidak transparan. Kepala Foreign Office sebelumnya, Olly Robbins, bahkan mengklaim adanya tekanan kuat dari kantor PM dalam proses tersebut. Namun Cat justru menyebut bahwa pemberian izin keamanan merupakan kewenangan Foreign Office dan menyatakan bahwa keterlibatan langsung menteri dalam proses tersebut sangat tidak biasa. Pernyataan ini memunculkan pertanyaan besar terkait transparansi dan akuntabilitas dalam pemerintahan Inggris, serta memperdalam krisis politik yang sedang berlangsung.
Whereby the Foreign Office personnel security team get in touch with the UKSV and the government security group in the Cabinet Office and ask the question, could they get some advice? Because the presumption had been that given Peter Mandelson had been a member of the House of Lords, that the long-standing convention that he didn't require developed vetting was assumed, and they wanted to get proper policy advice from experts on whether that was the case. And what I can see is an audit trail of discussion between security officials debating how the policy framework would apply in this instance. And I should say it is unusual, although not unprecedented, for a political appointee to take up post as an ambassador. What I can see is there is a senior official from the government security group that goes back to the Foreign Office security team and advises two things. One, that this is a decision for the Foreign Office, and two, that they would advise developed vetting is sought.
Thank you. And so we know that vetting took place. Could you just explain to us, when this developed vetting happens, it's not done by the Foreign Office, it's done by the UKSV, and they produce a document, is that right?
That is correct.
Was it one document or two documents or what?
It'd be helpful to explain what happens,
yes, please do,
for the benefit of the committee and the House. So the process, which is governed by a formal agreement between UKSV and the Foreign Office, is they are classified as something called a make recommendation department, which means that UKSV do all of the vetting that they would normally undertake for any other department, and they make a recommendation that is non-binding to the Foreign Office.
The Foreign Office is an exception, along with some other government departments, I think, that Olly Robbins was telling us. Is that right?
That is correct. In the middle of March, I have a meeting with Sir Olly and a senior member of his team, and this is after the point that I've been told that this summary document exists. I specifically ask to see this document and any decision-making audit trail around those judgments at the time. It was made clear to me that that information would not be forthcoming.
Who made that clear to you?
Sir Olly.
Right. And why?
I suppose I'd go back to in the actual meeting, the specific reasons were not discussed, but I go back to the context at the time. There was a lot of back and forth discussion about the status of how we would treat vetting information. I'd advised the Prime Minister that I would give him detailed advice once I'd seen the relevant documentation. The earliest opportunity where I was able to receive that advice and ask questions of experts was on the 13th of April, and I told the Prime Minister on the 14th of April. And I personally reached the conclusion that, having seen all of that expert advice, that this information was within the scope of the humble address and my responsibility is to the Prime Minister in advising him as to whether I had fully complied and the government has fully complied in both the letter and the spirit of the humble address. And I felt that this was pertinent information to discharge my responsibilities. So my view is that due process was followed. And if I might explain why I believe that, it is because the process, as I've outlined to the committee, is that UKSV make a recommendation and the Foreign Office make a decision as to whether to grant DV. That is the process, and that is the process that is agreed with the Foreign Office.
Just to follow up on this document, is it the case that a minister would ever have been shown one of these documents? Do you have an idea?
It's highly unusual, but at the point at which I told the Prime Minister, I only shared with him the very minimal information that this document existed, and I did share with him the overall recommendation and explained the process under which final DV should have been granted.
Is it your view that generally you think ministers or the Prime Minister should be involved in that final decision on whether or not to grant security clearance?
I think it's a judgment for the individual decision-making authority. In this instance, that is the Foreign Office.
You've said that all the documentation around the appointment itself has now been included in the first batch of published documents, and that you've been very rigorous to make sure it covers. Why is there no formal record of the actual meeting at which the Prime Minister decided to go ahead and make the appointment?
So two things. I want to be really clear about what I have said, in case there's any misunderstanding. I have undertaken an information gathering process which I'm confident has now received all of the information that is within the scope of the humble address. I've done everything I can to identify information. There is never going to be a moment where I can say that every single possible document has been identified. I hope you will appreciate that. I'm confident I've undertaken a process that allows me to be confident I've run the right sort of thorough process. I hope that distinction is clear. And there is some information, given this conversation about vetting, I believe that is relevant to the appointment of Peter Mandelson. That information is still being processed, so it hasn't all been published. It is being processed as part of the information gathering for the humble address. And sorry, I've forgotten the second part.
It's about the actual minute of the meeting at which the Prime Minister said, right, here's the due diligence, and he's advised about all the various other aspects, and he said, yes, I want it to be Peter Mandelson set that in motion.
As I've said to you, it is normal to keep a record of those sorts of decisions.
But there isn't one of this.
I have shared with you the information that we have.
Are you asking why there isn't a further document setting out a record of that meeting?
There are a number of examples where we have had to undertake further investigation based on the information that we have. And wherever you would expect to see more information, we have undertaken follow-up inquiries.
And wouldn't you expect to see further information around this?
I would.
So you're continuing to push?
We have undertaken further investigation.
Jelajahi cara baru mendapatkan informasi. Download MetroTV Extend sekarang.